Hello there, and a very warm welcome to year-end part 2, where we're going to take you through setting up your 2026 payroll. My name's Duncan, and as you can see, I am joined by my colleague Sarah, and we will be co-presenting today's session. We're also joined by Jade and Ollie, who are standing by in the background, ready and waiting to answer your questions. Let's now take a look at what we'll cover in the webinar. So this session follows on from part 1, where we finished the 2025 tax year, and I'm going to start things off by showing you how to set up the 2026 tax year, which involves transferring your payroll data from Sage Payroll 2025. We're then going to take a look at setting up your payroll calendar, and if you have set up your financial year in payroll to run January to December, at the same time you will be prompted to clear financial balances. So we'll be explaining how you do that and what balances are cleared, as well as setting up calendars for both weekly and monthly payrolls. I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to take you through what's new for 2026. So outlining the key budget changes, some of the changes in Sage 50 payroll and the new auto-enrollment rules and functionality. And then she'll give you a demo on processing in the 2026 tax year, including how to retrieve the latest revenue and auto-enrollment payroll notifications, as well as making submissions to Revenue and NERSA, which is the National Auto-Enrollment Retirement Savings Authority. We should then have some time left at the end to continue answering your questions, and we'll also go through some of the further support available. So let's get things underway by taking a look at the process for setting up the 2026 tax year. Now, you would kick this off in your 2025 software, and to be able to set up the new tax year, you first need to have installed the year-end update, so you need to be on the latest version. And ideally, you should have finished processing all of your pay periods for 2025, and your payroll status would be at end of period, or EOP. You would then run a task to set up the 2026 tax year, which will then transfer your payroll data from 2025 into the new software that you'll be using in 2026. When that data is transferred, all cumulative figures for the tax year are automatically cleared. Any leavers that left in 2025 are removed from the payroll in 2026. And RPN numbers, RPN logs, and payroll submission logs are all cleared in 2026, ready for the submissions you'll be doing in the new tax year. But don't worry, none of that information is lost, as you will still have access to your 2025 payroll, and that's what you can use for any historical reporting purposes. So let's take you through the steps for setting up the new tax year. I'm just going to bring these slides down. And we are starting this off in Sage Payroll 2025. And first thing to do is to check that we are at end of period. So the status is shown towards the bottom of the screen here. So I'm at end of period for period 52. That was my 26th of December pay date, and I've already confirmed that that was my last pay date of the tax year. I've installed the year-end update, and as you can see, it says PYE 2025 ready. And I'm now ready to set up 2026. So to do this, I go to the year-end menu at the top. I would then come down to tax, and I would select this option to set up the 2026 tax year. I'm then going to see a confirmation message, and that prompts us to click continue to create the 2026 payroll data. And when I go ahead and click continue, you'll see a progress bar moving across, explaining what's happening behind the scenes. So things like clearing the logs, removing levers, and then when the setup's complete, it tells you that you've successfully copied your payroll into Sage Payroll 2026. So that is this payroll transferred. If you have other payrolls in 2025, for example, if I had a monthly payroll, I would just need to complete these exact same steps in that payroll in order to transfer that across to the new year. But for now, I'm just going to click close. I'm going to minimize payroll for 2025. And as you can see here on my desktop, I have a new shortcut for Sage 50 Payroll 2026. And what I can now do is double click that shortcut I'll be able to enter my usual username and password. I'll put those details in now. And because I've just set up the new year, I can now see that my payroll is listed in this drop-down. So I can select that, enter my payroll password, and when I click OK, it's then going to update the data. So this is just a one-time process, the first time you go into 2026 for that payroll. And that has taken us into the program. So it's just popped up here with our advice center, which I'm just going to close down. And if you take a look at the top of the screen, you can see this is Sage 50 Payroll for 2026. That is version 29. It's marked as Budget 2026 compliant. So it's updated with some of the budget changes. And towards the bottom of the screen here, we are in tax year 2026. So that's the new year set up. Our next step will be to set up our payroll calendar. But before I show you that, I just want to show you some of the things that have happened to our existing employee records, just so you understand what happened when we transferred our data. So if I just go into Edit Employees, you can see the employee details for the first employee in my list. And if I select the Tax, PRSI and USC tab, you'll notice just here that the RPN number has been cleared, which has prepared this record for retrieving the first RPNs of the new tax year. So if there were any changes to tax credits, cutoff points, or USC details, they can be imported in your first period. If we look at the Pay and Year-to-Date tab, all of the tax year-to-date figures have been cleared to zero, which is most of the figures that you're seeing here. But you may have noticed that we still have some balances for the financial year in non-taxable deductions and for the employer PRSI. And these will be cleared down separately at the start of our financial year, which just happens to be January in this example. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail a little bit later on. As well as that, the tax year values for payments and deductions are cleared, but financial year values are still showing. So that's your payments, and this is your deductions. And you may have noticed that there's a new tab for auto enrollment. So this is where details of auto enrollment payroll notifications will show once you've imported them. And that's something that Sarah's going to go into more detail on later on in the webinar. But that's all set up and kind of ready for auto enrollment. So I've now set up the tax year for this payroll. Obviously, I would repeat those steps for any other payrolls that I need to set up. Now, although that task can be ran at end of period for any period of the year, we do strongly recommend that you only do this once you've completed your last pay date of 2025. And that way, if you've had any starters or leavers towards the end of the tax year, they would be transferred across correctly. And if you do have a financial year that doesn't run January to December, it's going to maintain accurate financial year balances. So next thing we need to think about is setting up our payroll calendar for 2026. And as part of your payroll calendar, you will be recording details of when your financial year begins. So in your 2025 calendar, if you've set up that your financial year runs the same as the tax year, so January to December, it means when you set up your payroll calendar, you are going to be prompted to also clear your financial balances. So on the screenshot just here, you can see where the financial year details are saved in your payroll calendar. And if you want to check how yours is set up in your 2025 software, you can go to company/payroll and then calendar, and you'll find your financial year details at the bottom. And if you've ticked the box to say it's the same as the tax year, it just means when you set up your new payroll calendar in 2026, you're going to see a message asking if you want to clear your financial balances. So it does give you two options. You can automatically clear them down by selecting the first option, or you can select not to clear down financial balances, and then you can clear them manually via the year-end and financial menu. By the way, if your financial year is not set to the same as the tax year in your payroll calendar, you won't see this message until you set period for the first period in your specific financial year. Just to be clear on what balances are cleared, if you choose to clear the financial year balances, it is the ones that I've highlighted on the screenshots on this slide. So on the Pay and Year-to-Date tab, it's the non-taxable deductions for the financial year that are cleared, and also the employer PRSI. And then the payment and deduction balances are cleared are the ones that I've highlighted. So it's the to-date balance for the payments, and it's the employee and employer balances for deductions. Important note on deductions, if you have any with a reducing balance, and a common example is the bike to work scheme, those balances would not be cleared automatically as they are required so that deduction stops at the same time. And any all-time balances, so total balances, remain in place until you choose to clear those manually. So you're going to see that in the demo, but I just want to walk you through the steps for setting up a new payroll calendar. So this is really simple, and your payroll calendar will all be based on your first pay date of the tax year. So you will need to enter your first pay date, and that should be the date your employee receives their pay. If they're paid monthly, bi-monthly, or quarterly, you also need to select valid pay days. So which days of the week could they be paid? And then when you click update, that's going to then create a calendar based off of that first pay date of the year. And I'm going to show you both weekly and monthly examples in the demo. So let's take a look at that now. Just bringing those slides down again. So first thing I'm going to do is select the company/payroll option at the top of the screen just here. And then towards the bottom, I can click on to calendar. This is where I'm going to set up my payroll calendar. Now, because my previous payroll calendar was set up that the financial year runs January to December, the same as the tax year, at this point, I'm being prompted to clear down my financial year balances. So for the majority of users, this will be the appropriate thing to do. So you would choose to clear down financial year balances, and you would click continue. The other option, if you want a bit more control over specifically which balances are cleared, is to not do it via this menu, but then go into the year-end and financial menu to clear them down manually. But I'm happy to clear them down automatically, so I'm going to click continue. It then confirms the financial year balances are cleared, and that then takes me into the new calendar tab. So this is a weekly payroll. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my first pay date of the year. Now this should be your usual pay date. If, for example, you pay on a Thursday and the 1st of January would have been your first pay date of 2026, but obviously that's a bank holiday, you would still set that as your first pay date for the purposes of setting up your calendar. And in my example, my employees are paid on a Friday each week, and I know that the first Friday in 2026 is the 2nd of January. So I've entered that there as my pay date. And then if required, I can enter an alternative date for the bank date, which you might need to do if when you create your banking file, you need to use an earlier date so that the funds actually arrive with your employees on the pay date itself. So if I wanted the bank date to be the day before the pay date, in this example, I could enter the 1st of January. Now, it is also possible to set check dates and gyro dates if you use any of these pay frequencies, but I have chosen to have these hidden from my calendar. And once I'm happy with these first pay period dates, I would click update. And you can see it has built my weekly calendar based on a Friday being the pay date. So period 1 will be the 2nd of January. And then it's each Friday running right the way through the year, all the way up to period 52, which in 2026 will be the 25th of December. Just underneath, you can see the financial year details. So these have been pulled through from my previous year's calendar. And because I had this box ticked that the financial year is the same as the tax year, that was why I was prompted to clear my financial balances. And to save this calendar, I would just go ahead and click Save, but I'm going to cancel out at this point because I also want to show you setting up a monthly calendar. Now, a bit of a tip to share with you at this point. If you have ever been planning to switch the pay frequency for a payroll, so maybe you wanted to move all of your employees off of weekly and onto monthly, if you're able to do that at the very start of a tax year, before you've set any periods, you can change the pay frequency directly from the company details. So if I go to company/payroll and then click company details, what I've got set up as a weekly payroll at this point in the year, and only this point in the year, can be changed. So I'm going to do this just so I can show you a monthly calendar, but also a handy tip for you as well. So with this now set up as a monthly payroll, let's have a look at setting up a monthly calendar. So I can go to company/payroll. I can come down to calendar. Now I have already cleared down the financial year balances, but it won't do any harm to do it again. So I'm going to click continue and then OK. And this is the new calendar tab for a monthly pay frequency. Now the main difference here is that we do need to select valid pay days, so at least one. So I'm going with Monday to Friday being my valid pay days. And then we would enter the first pay date of the year that we want to base the rest of our calendar on. So in my example, my employees are paid on the 25th day of each month. So I'm going to set my pay date to the 25th of January, 2026. This time I'm going to leave the bank date blank because I just want it to be the same as the pay date in this example. I've already got my valid pay day set. So to create the calendar, I can go ahead and click Update. Now what this message is telling me is that the 25th of January isn't a valid pay day. It doesn't land on a Monday through to Friday. And that's fine, that is true for January, but because I need the rest of my calendar to use the 25th of the month as the pay date, that's why I've set it as my first pay period date. And if I click OK to this message, you'll see how that's been handled. So in my calendar, period 1, the pay date is set to Friday the 23rd of January, because the 25th was a Sunday. And for this one, the bank date is just copying the pay date. But then for the rest of the year, it uses the 25th as the pay date, when that's a valid banking day, and a few months where it's used earlier dates due to that falling on a weekend. Now, it is possible to amend any of the entries in your calendar, but the rule is the pay date must fall into the relevant tax period. So for monthly, period 1 is the 1st to the 31st of January. For weekly, week 1 would be the 1st to the 7th of January. So pay date has to fall into the tax period. The bank date, if required, can be a different date. Now, to save this one again, I could click Save, but I just want to show you one other option for monthly calendars. So if I just return to the new calendar tab, some people would have a pay schedule where employees are paid on the last day of the month, or perhaps the last banking day of the month. And if that's how your calendar would work, instead of entering your first pay date, you can actually tick the box to say that your pay date is the last day of the month. You can then choose your valid pay days. So in this example, I want last working day of the month. And if required, if we needed a difference between pay date and bank date, we could make it the day earlier by entering a negative number, or we could keep it the same by leaving it at 0. So just to show you how this calendar turns out, if I click Update, this calendar now shows the last working day of each month as the pay date, and I've asked the bank date to be the same. So hopefully you now know how to set up your own calendar. I'm going to cancel out once again because this is actually a weekly payroll. So let me just change the pay frequency back. And if I now set up my calendar for real, I'm just going to choose my first weekly pay date. This time I'll just set the bank date to the same. So I'm going to leave that blank. When I click update, this is now my weekly calendar. And to save these details, I will click on to save. So that is my calendar setup. I just want to finish this demo by showing you what happened to those financial year balances. So if I just jump back into the employee details, we'll just use our first employee as the example here. I'm going to click onto the pay and year to date tab. And you can see here that the financial year balance has been set to 0. And the employer financial year PRSI has now been cleared. The all-time balances are still present. For payments, all of the to-dates and tax years are now cleared, but the standard amounts are still here. And for deductions, employee and employer balances have been cleared for most of my deductions, but for the bike to work one, we still have a balance remaining because this is a reducing balance deduction. So payroll has handled that exactly how I would want it to, and it has left these all-time kind of total balances in place. So if you did prefer to clear financial balances manually, that can be done from the year-end and financial menu. So you can clear cost analysis, payments, and deductions. And you'll see with these options, you have greater control over exactly what balances are cleared. So you can tick the boxes for balances you want to clear at this point. But there's more guidance on doing this in our help center. So that is our 2026 payroll calendar setup, and you saw that we also cleared the financial balances at the same time. Just to recap the steps for the payroll calendar, first of all, select your first pay date of the year. That's the date the employee is paid, the date they receive the pay. Choose your valid pay days if you're on a monthly based pay frequency. Click update to create your 2026 calendar. And if you're happy with that, you can just go ahead and click save. So we're pretty much ready now to crack on with period 1 of the new tax year. Just to recap the steps that I've just completed, I set up the new tax year from Sage Payroll 2025. So it was from the year-end tax, set up 2026 tax year menu. We then set up our new payroll calendar, and because the financial year also ran January to December, we selected the option to clear our financial balances. We've got more steps on getting ready for the new tax year following the link in the handout, but it is now time for me to hand over to Sarah, and Sarah's going to run us through what's new in 2026. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much for that, Duncan. And before we dive into processing the 2026 tax year, I do want to look a little bit at what is new in 2026, just to set the scene a little bit. So in terms of budget changes, really not a lot to talk about here. So there's no change to standard rate cut-off points for income tax, no change to tax credits either. Now, there is a 2% upper threshold increase for standard rates of USC, so that's went up to €28,700. And employer PRSI threshold has increased from 527 to €522 per week. And then national minimum wage has went up this year as well. So from 1st of January 26, that will increase to €14.15. So yeah, not a whole load of changes here. Definitely a couple to look out for, especially minimum wage. If you do have any minimum wage employees on your payroll, definitely a good time to review that. So you might recognise this slide if you came to our part 1 of payroll year end, but I did want to use it just to run through and recap and go through a bit of a summary of the key points of probably the biggest change in 2026, which is auto enrolment. So probably the key points with this one, it is mandatory for eligible employees. Now your eligible employees are aged 23 to 60, and they'll be earning above the €20,000. It's capped at €80,000 gross pay, be calculated on gross deducted from net. And remember, opt-out and suspension options are available for the employees as well. Now, you might be thinking, what does that actually mean for your payroll process? So how is that going to look in your day-to-day processing? Well, the scheme will be managed by NERSA, and NERSA will use the payroll data from revenue to identify those eligible employees that work for you. And it is going to be pretty straightforward. So first thing that's going to happen is NERSA are going to use the 13-week look-back period and identify any eligible employees. They'll then send you, the employer, an APN or an automatic enrolment payroll notification. You'll then retrieve this in Payroll, and Payroll will apply the APN automatically to the relevant employees. You'll continue processing the payroll as you normally would, so enter any time and pay or an end of period. And once everything is done and dusted, you'll then submit the contribution over to NERSA. Once it's submitted, NERSA will then collect the contribution, usually through direct debit, and you'll have that set up when you set up the online portal, and that's going to be live early December. So we're looking at around the 1st for that one. And once that's done, they'll then proceed with investing the contribution as the final step. So that's what the new process is going to look like in a nutshell, but we will be bringing that to life when we process period 1. So with that being said, let's move on to actually processing your first period in your new tax year. So you've got your calendar set up, you're ready to begin processing period 1, and that really just works like any other pay period, with a few key things to keep in mind for the start of the new year. So you'll set your period. So you'll begin by setting your payroll to period 1. Sage will automatically run validate payroll data just to check for any errors. Next thing you'll do, you'll retrieve your RPNs as you normally would. It's the first period of the new tax year, so you will expect to see some updates for things like cut-off points. Once your RPNs are retrieved, your employee records are almost going to be fully up to date for 2026. But then after that is going to be a new step in the process. So you'll also now retrieve AEPNs. So you'll do that as part of the new legislation coming into place, but we will show you that in the demo, so don't worry. So once you retrieve your AEPNs, that's going to apply any automatic enrolment changes to the relevant employees that NERSA have sent over. And then you'll be ready to enter your time and pay as normal. So you'll enter your timesheets just as you would in any other pay run. You then run your end of period, and then you're ready to submit to revenue as again you normally would. But again, another extra step on the end here, you would submit your pension information over to NERSA as well. But again, don't worry, we will be looking at that in the demo. But processing period 1 is going to be straightforward, but it is important just to make sure your calendar is correctly set up. And remember, we do want to retrieve any new information, so your RPNs and APNs, before you do that enter time and pay step. But let's pick up the demo from where Duncan left off, and we're ready to process period 1. I'm just going to jump into my payroll. Got the calendar set up, so I'm just going to go into set period. So my payday is the 2nd. Check my pay date and bank day, and that was set up in my calendar. So they've all pulled through from my calendar setup. Now, if your holiday year aligns, you probably notice this pop up. And because I use holiday tracking in Payroll, my holiday year starts on the 1st of January. You can see I'm now prompted to roll forward my holiday and my absence year. And it is a little bit similar to clearing your balances. It is quite important to do it at the right time and choose the correct settings based on how your holiday scheme works. Now, I am going to keep everything selected, so I'm going to roll forward my holiday year. I want to carry forward my employee holidays, so any unused holidays. And I wanted to set up the payroll's next holiday year start and end date and set their adjustment to 0 as well. So I can just continue to set my period. So once that's done, you can see we're now at start of period 1 for a weekly payroll with the pay date of the 2nd of January. So next thing we'll do is we're going to retrieve our revenue payroll notifications, our RPNs, which again, that's going to be something pretty standard in the process at this point. I've connected to my ROS certificate. You can see here, as expected, we have got our updated RPNs for our employees. Now, RPNs for 2026 typically become available in December 2025. So if you are doing it a bit early, they might not just be ready yet. But don't worry, they will be available by the time you process period 1. But we've successfully retrieved those RPNs. We look at FE and look at the little information icon. We can see that everything has been updated. So if we look at the USC rate cutoff, you can see that's now increased to the 28,700 euros, which was part of the changes in 2026. So we've successfully retrieved those RPNs for our employees. I'm just going to go ahead and import that in and finish. And the next thing you're going to see is something that is new for 2026. So there are going to be a couple of different reminders in the payroll just to remind you to add this step into your payroll process. So you can see it's came up with a reminder for me to retrieve my AAPNs now. I'm just going to click no for now because I do want to show you a couple different ways. Now, if I was to go and skip that step and go and enter my time and pay, you can see it will give me another prompt. So you might be a bit worried about adding this new step into your process, but don't worry, payroll is going to remind you along the way if you haven't retrieved those details. So I'm going to come out of that. And I'm going to go in to retrieve my APNs now. And this is going to look very similar to retrieving your RPNs. So you can see very similarly out there, connect to my ROS certificate. And you can see here, we have 4 employees that NERSA have sent over. We'll look at the information. You can see they're going to be auto-enrolled. So you can see their auto-enrollment status has now changed to active. We have an auto-enrollment start date, and we can see the contributions in there as well. And that's the same for all 4 employees. So we've got 4 employees that NERSA have assessed. They've identified these employees as eligible employees. So they've sent us the information for them to be enrolled through payroll. Now, once the opt-out and suspension notifications start to come into play, you will also receive these through retrieving your APN. Now, you won't expect to see these in the early days as they can't opt out until month 7 and 8. But once month 7 and 8 do come round, then you can start to expect to see these notices pull through in here. So I'm going to go ahead and import my auto-enrollment information into payroll. And we can see we've got 4 APNs successfully imported. So we can see that that's changed to active. So I'm going to go and finish. And I do just want to look at the record now that we've imported both our RPNs and our APNs as well. So if I go to edit employees, And if I go along just on Effie's record, then you can see here, we've now got an RPN number in there. So we've got an RPN number of 1. We have our yearly cut-off of the €28,700 that has increased. But probably the main thing is the auto enrolment. So all of that with the RPN is expected. You would usually do that. But you can see in the new auto enrolment tab, we now have the information there for Effie. So she's shown as active. We've got our auto enrolment start date in there, and we have the contributions in there as well. So we know that our AAPN has been imported successfully. And we can see that she's shown as active as well. So that's just a little bit of how that change is going to look in the employee record. So I'm now at a point where I can enter time and pay. So I'm just going to do a batch entry. And you can see we actually have a new column in deductions for AE pension. So that will automatically pull through. There's nothing you need to do in payroll to add that, apart from retrieve your AAPNs and import them onto the employees that are affected. So I'm still just going to continue with Effie as a bit of an example. Now, if I want to go into detailed entry, I just want to take a quick look at her payslip. You can see that there is the auto enrolment pension also showing on the payslip there. So that's what to expect to see for any employees that are going to be automatically enrolled into the pension scheme. You can see the deduction showing there for employee and employer. So there's no other records I need to update, so I'm happy with what I've got in there at the moment. So I can now just save my valid records for my first period of the new tax year. So I've saved my time and pay. At this point, you would just process the payroll as usual, so I could go and view my control summary and my gross to net report, but I'm just going to skip ahead and run my end of period. So I'm at end of period for period 1 of the new year now, which means we are now ready to make our submissions. So firstly, I'm just going to send my usual payroll submission. Again, a lot of you will be used to doing this by now. And I'm going to just submit that over to revenue. So once that's submitted to revenue, I'm going to move on to the new part of the process, would be submitting our pension contributions over to NERSA. And I can do that by clicking on this button here. Now, just a heads up on this one, there is a deadline for the submission, and that is just by 6:30 p.m. on the employee's pay date. So just bear that in mind going forward. So again, you can see it is a very similar format to submitting over to revenue, but just for your auto enrolment pension contributions instead. So you can see I've got my 4 employees getting picked up on this, my 4 active employees. Now, like I mentioned earlier, don't expect to see anything in these until months 7 and 8. That's when you should start receiving any opt-outs through at that point. So won't see anything in there in the early days. Now I'm happy with the amount. I've reviewed the number of employees. So I can now just go ahead and submit that information over to NERSA. And you can see that has been successful and that is completed. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about reporting. So if I go to my direct payroll reporting, you can see we do have auto enrolment contribution submission log that you can view. So once you have submitted that, with the auto enrolment being quite new, you might well want to keep a record of those submissions in the early days. So if I go to view my submission log, you can see we have a log of the submission that we've just made to NERSA there. Now, we will also have an APN log. Now, this isn't in the program just yet, so you can see if I go to click on that, I will get an error, but this is something that will be coming. But as a bit of a workaround for that for now, you can view the details of any APN changes in the employee audit report. So if I just go to my other reports and go to employee, it's just this one here, so employee audit. If I go to preview that, you can see I've got my 4 employees that have been auto-enrolled and the data from when that's been applied as well. So that's just a bit of a workaround for now until the APN log is in place. And with that said, we have finished processing period 1 of the new tax year. So I do just want to quickly recap the process. So we've set up the new tax year from Sage Payroll 2025, created your payroll calendar in Sage 50 Payroll 2026, cleared financial balances. We've set period 1 and rolled forward our holiday year. We've then retrieved RPNs, and then we've retrieved AEPNs to update any new employee pension info. We've then entered our timesheets as usual, ran end of period, and then submitted to revenue and to NERSA for our auto-enrolment. And with all that said, we have completed our first pay run of the year. Now, we retrieved our RPNs. You can see there wasn't many things to update here. So we have updated the USC rate cut-off too. So that went up to €28,700. And we've seen that in the record as well. So we've seen it pull through a new RPN number also. So we looked at Effie in that example. Additional steps, so this is something new in the process. We retrieved our APNs. We then reviewed the record and we could see in the auto-enrolment tab that the relevant employee status had changed to active. So it pulled through an auto-enrolment date, it pulled through the percentages, and when the APN was last downloaded as well. And then last but not least, a new submission that is going to be part of the process going forward is your auto-enrolment submission. So as well as submitting to revenue as we normally would, we've also sent our auto-enrolment contribution submission over to NERSA. So again, the screen very similar to sending your usual payroll submission, but we've reviewed our employees in the summary, and then we've submitted that directly over to NERSA. So a couple extra steps in the process now, but like I showed in the demo, you will get reminded if you do miss anything off. So payroll will tell you if you have missed anything out. And on that auto-enrolment submission, remember the deadline for that is 6:30 p.m. on the employee's pay date. So with that said, that does bring us to the end of the content for today's webinar. I do just want to finish things up by running through a little bit of further support and plenty of time for questions at the end. So as you all know, there is a part 1 webinar. Some of you might have attended this already, but don't worry if you have missed out. We do have plenty of sessions running all the way up until the 16th of December. And in that session, we guide you through setting up, we guide you through finishing off the 2025 tax year and set you up for a smooth transition into 2026. And we do an introduction to auto-enrolment as well. So how best to prepare for your new auto-enrolment duties. But if you have missed out, you can sign up for part 1 using the link in the chat, or the follow-up email we'll send after a day's webinar as well. Do you want to shout out the Help Centre? It is a really great resource, especially around auto-enrolment. We do have our new auto-enrolment hub live on the Help Centre. So naturally, everyone will have a lot of questions, but make sure to check that out if you haven't already. And you can get that by going to sage.ie/help. But you can get our support guides on there and info on how to get in touch with our support team if you need to. Now, last thing I want to mention is we have went through a bit of a high-level overview of how auto-enrolment will look in your payroll process today, but we do have some further training options available that are designed to make this transition as smooth as possible. Now, do note charges do apply for this service, but if it is something you think you would be interested in, then just drop us an email at sage50webinars@sage.com to register your interest, and we can get one of the team to reach out to you with some more information on that. So that brings us to the end of the further support. I am going to jump onto mute just to help everyone out with some further questions. I do think we've got a few coming through there. If you are leaving us at this point, you will get a short survey. If you do have a couple seconds to fill that out, that really would be appreciated. But I'm just going to jump onto mute for now, but I will see you all shortly to wrap the session up. Hi again, everyone. I really hope you've all enjoyed today's session. I will be closing the session down in the next few minutes or so. We've tried to get through as many questions as we can. There are still a few outstanding. We will try and pick these up, but don't worry if we don't get around to you. We do have our auto enrolment hub live on the help centre, so do check that out if you haven't already. We have compiled a lot of FAQs on there, so you might well find your answer on the auto enrolment hub. So really, really handy to have with this new auto enrolment coming into place. So as you exit the webinar, you will probably see a short survey. If you can take a moment to fill that out, your feedback is really valuable to us. So we would love to hear what you thought, what worked well, anything that could be improved so we can keep making these sessions even better for you. You will get a follow-up email later today. It'll have a link to today's webinar recording on there and info on how to register for any future sessions. But thanks again from me, Duncan, Ollie and Jade for joining us today. But hopefully we'll see you again soon. It is bye for now.